Welcome back to Build Order Tutorials. Today we have Zest showing us a double StarGate build with Void Rays against Zerg, a very popular build and a very annoying one for Zergs to be dealing with in the current meta. So let's see how Zest does it. As we start the game here, you are going to send out a probe now to go scout and block your opponent's natural hatchery, and then, as usual, send your first made probe down to the low ground to the natural to start building your wall with a 14 pylon. Keep that probe in the natural. Just take some minerals. And chrono your nexus and build a 16 gateway at the front. Your scouting probe should have made its way across to the Zerg's natural and should be actively blocking it. Grab an assimilator back at home. Continue producing probes. Start rallying in a probe to the gas. And then put 2 more probes in the gas. So fully saturate it. Then send a probe to the natural. Your own natural, that is. And build your nexus at 20. Keep that probe in the natural as well. Take some minerals. Send it to the wall at the front. And build a Cybernex core also on 20. It's a little bit of a blip in that probe production, but now go back to producing probes. Grab your second assimilator in the main base. Get a 22 pylon. Fill up your second gas geyser and chrono the main nexus. Start up an adept and chrono that. Get a StarGate around 220 on the timer. And warp gate starts up now as well. Get a second adept. With your first adept, shade it out to scout a little bit, but if your probe was active on the other side of the map, don't feel too eager about getting it out on the map. Keep producing probes. With the StarGate done, grab a Void Ray and chrono it. Get another pylon. Your 2 adepts should be out, and you can send them across the map if you desire. Get a second gateway to complete your wall off on this map. On other maps, just make sure to get a second gateway. Chrono the StarGate once again. The Void Ray should be headed towards an Overlord. Get an Oracle right behind the production of that Void Ray. If your adepts were out scouting, bring them home to prepare the defense of your third base. And grab that nexus at around 4 minutes. You can see that Zest never bothered actually scouting with the adepts, feeling confident in his scouting with the probe, and confident in his defenses with a Void Ray and Oracle. Grab 2 assimilators right now, and chrono the natural nexus. So, he doesn't have to remake the adepts. And grab a StarGate at around 4:15. Another pylon, just remember not to get supply blocked. Start harassing with the Void Ray and the Oracle, if you can. But remember that harassment is just one part of it. It's also a lot of scouting being done by being on your opponent's side of the map. At this point, you're just producing a lot of probes. Build another Void Ray. Grab a Twilight Council and a Forge around 450. And your third Nexus should be finishing, so start rallying your probe production to the third, and chrono that third base as well. And start producing 2 Void Rays at a time from the Stargates. Depending on what you've been scouting, a cautionary shield battery at the third could make a lot of sense. Chrono the main Nexus as well, as we really ramp up the probe production and look to saturate that third as soon as possible. Now you should be able to start up charge and +1 weapons. And chrono your third base again. Get both of your gases at the third base. And a Templar Archives. And start building up some production. Additional gateway has been put down. And now it really depends on what you're witnessing unfold on the map. With the build mostly done here, let's move on to the build discussion. The strengths. It is a solid opener. It is a great mix of defense, offense, scouting, and macro, so the best Protoss players can do this build with very little else added to it, right? So in this example with Zest, he didn't make any other units past the first 2 Adepts and the Void Rays, right? And an Oracle, of course. But there's no additional gateway warp-ins. He didn't even really need his second gateway, except that it helped wall off his natural. And you can be that greedy if you know what you're scouting for, and if you keep, your probe alive and know the timings of the Zerg and all that good stuff. It's something that Zest can do, and as you get better at StarCraft, you can do as well. But even if you mess it up because you're not as good as Zest, and not many of us are, it still provides some good defense, right? Yeah, maybe your third base gets denied by a Ling Flood, and that's kind of annoying. But you do have a Void Ray for any early Roach surprises, and you do have an Oracle to help out against early Ling surprises as well. And if it's a Ling Flood, for instance, right in the beginning of the game onto your natural base, the 2 Adepts staying at home will help against that, and you could just swap over from a Void Ray first to an Oracle first if you realize that's what you need. So it's very malleable. It's a very good build. As that's why StarGate Opener has been so common in this matchup for so long. It can split into either Fast Air or Charge Lot Archon. So for most part, the pros are immediately going into, or kind of immediately going into, Charge Lot Archon, as we saw Zest set up to do. And if we had witnessed more of the game, we would have seen him add on, half a dozen gateways and actually, fully transition really. What happened in that game, though, and why I was cut short a little bit, is that he was being all-in and was going to start making shield batteries and chroning up more Void Rays. So it was not the best example. It wasn't the longest part of the build we could have chosen here for this build order, but it is still the build order that will move on either into the fast Charge Lot Archon follow-up, or if you so desire, and this is seen more so in the latter games, into just mass air. You can continue making Void Rays, add a Fleet Beacon, add +1 air weapons, and then go into carriers. So there's some fun options. And it can be changed to a fake second Stargate as well. So if you learn the beginning of this build, which is really just a Stargate expand with a pretty greedy third Nexus, you're going to be able to take that first, 5 or 6 minutes or whatever it is, and then transfer it into anything else. Which, with the Void Ray first being so popular because it got cheaper, there's not really much that a Zerg can do outside of getting Overlord speed to really confirm what you're doing if you desire to hide it. If that is your goal, to try and trick your opponent into being scared of a second Stargate, then you can learn how to fake the second Stargate and actually be building into something like a quicker transition into Charge Archon, or actually doing like an Immortal push or anything like that, right? So the bones of this build, the first 4 to 5 minutes, are actually just a super solid thing to learn for all the Protoss players out there. The weaknesses of this particular build, the actual double Stargate, Skipping a robo can be difficult to work with. Obviously, the Void Ray kind of covers what an Immortal would usually also cover. So, and it has the benefit of, obviously being in the air, so roaches can't attack back at it. But the robo can be a safety tool that a lot of people depend on, especially in the earlier leagues. Immortals being even more of an A move than Void Rays, which actually do at least require prismatic alignments, and the Void Rays actually being glass cannons against something that can shoot them, right? So the Immortal is even easier to control and pump out. Not to mention Observers, if you're not particularly good about using your Oracle actively. A lot of people depend on Observers to be cranked out and just littered around the map. There's no shame there if that's the point where you're at in StarCraft, but this build, it doesn't have that. You are going to have to get used to using an Oracle actively and having your Void Rays properly positioned and shield batteries and whatnot if you are being attacked. So yeah, it's not really a weakness, because like Zest wouldn't see it as a weakness, for instance, but if you're learning StarCraft, then it might be something that is concerning. It requires some multitasking to scout well with the Oracle. Again, Zest would not see this as a weakness, but for everyone out there who, doing a bajillion things in StarCraft is difficult, and it is for most of us, yeah, it does require a lot of that multitasking to scout well with the Oracle, and some knowledge of your Zerg opponent's playstyle and just Zerg timings in general to really be as greedy as Zest was in this particular example. There's going to be probably better examples of this build where they actually do build units aside from just 2 Adepts and air units that are probably a bit safer. But this is one of the good, the bones of the build are shown in this build order, and you can work off of it the more that you learn, like, okay, I need to be wary of Lings flooding my third, or I need to be wary of a Nidus Worm type attack, right? Whatever. But the point is, you gotta learn how to multitask scout with the Oracle. Again, the typical Protoss stuff, Probe, Adept, into Oracle Scouting can generally cover your bases, literally, but you do have to be pretty active with all those. The last weakness is actually the true weakness that even the pros will acknowledge, is that it is weak to Queen All-Ins. I put weak in quotes because it's not something that is a hard counter. Hard counters they're not very popular in StarCraft. It's something that we really have to worry about. Your execution and your scouting to alert you to changes is just usually so much more important in this game. But to be honest, it is pretty difficult to defend against well-executed Queen builds. And we saw a lot of that at IEM Katowice, with no spoilers intended here. There was a lot of PvZs where a Zerg player would do a Queen All-In, and a Protoss player seemed to know about it, seemed to have the defenses against it, and still faltered. So it is difficult, but as most of the people listening to this are not going to be professionals, it is going to be much more about your execution versus their execution, and if you're following this build to a T, your execution is going to be so much better than your Zerg opponent. So it is worth noting, it's difficult, but I believe in you guys to hold against them. And the tips and tricks. I already said this, and it's worth repeating. Early game scouting for Protoss. Probe, Adept, Oracle. The Probe scouts the presence of an early pool, or lack thereof. It scouts the presence of a third hatchery, even if you do let it stick around. And sometimes, if you're really sneaky, you can even get back into the main and see if the gas is still mining. That's a bit of a stretch, though. But by that point, the Adept is coming in, and she's going to get the double check on the fact that a third hatchery is actually down. She's going to get the double check on drones actually producing as opposed to 20 Lings. She's going to maybe get into that main base and see if a fast lair has started with her shade, or if the gas is still being mined. And then the Oracle comes in for that last scout that will last forever, right? The Oracle should not die, and has the ability, technically, to scout everything and still survive, thanks to Revelation having a bit of a cast range, right? So the Oracle can come in, again, check the drone count, check the gases, check the technology. It is one of the weaknesses of this particular build, though, that you don't have any sentries for any type of hallucinations. And while double Stargate shouldn't die to something like a fast muta build, or a muta build in general, we have seen it. So the Oracle, in this particular execution of this build, has an extra big job of actually even trying sometimes to get into the back corners of a base and see a spire, which that might lose the Oracle. Double Hallucination is a lot easier just to sacrifice those, right? But the Oracle can do it, and it's something that every Protoss player really needs to get in their head. Probe, Adept, Oracle, and then care for that Oracle like it is your newborn child. Check for scouting Overlords first with Void Ray Oracle. Sorry, read that too fast. Check for Overlords first with Void Ray, there we go. With your Void Ray. That seems like a no-brainer, and it pretty much is, but that's what the Void Ray is for. You're going to kill the Overlords that are positioned to do a suicide scout that tells them that you're going for a StarGate, but that's not a big surprise. What it doesn't tell them is there a second StarGate behind that? Is it just going into Twilight Council and Forge? Is there a fast robo behind it? They have no idea unless they can get Overlord speed, which some people do. But yeah, the Void Ray is fantastic at keeping the Zerg a bit more in the dark. The Oracle can tell you how greedy you can be, so again, very important to use that Oracle as well as you possibly can, and then if you are seeing all the things that Zest saw in this build, you can be as greedy as he was. So no additional gateway units warped in, no cautionary shield battery in the natural against Ling Floods. He did make one up at his third, but not even particularly quickly. He just knew that he wasn't being attacked, and when he did finally see he was being attacked, he did try to slap down a bunch of shield batteries, but I'll go ahead and spoil this particular game. He did lose to the Queen attack. But anyways, if you are using Oracle correctly, then hopefully you can see just how greedy you can be. Think of static defense positioning when you are defending. So this is one of those really difficult things that even the professionals really struggle with because they see something, go, oh shit, and then try to change up their build a little bit, chrono out some more units, and then are slapping down shield batteries just in a hurry, right? But one of the most important things that we've seen from defending a Queen all-in, which is really your biggest worry right now in this meta, is that if you put your shield batteries only at the front and only stack together, if they bring corrosive biles along, which many do, those are going to be taken out, and you're not going to have shield batteries, you're not going to have shield battery overcharge. So what you want to do usually is you're going to have, always 2 pylons powering everything, no Artosis pylons. You're going to want your 2 shield batteries at the front to be a bit apart so they don't get corrosive bile with 1 corrosive bile. And then you're also going to want a back line of shield batteries too, something that's even in your mineral line or behind your mineral line if there's space. So that when your front line of defense starts going a little bit sour, you can pull back even more into a safer shield battery while still technically defending your third base. And that also forces the Queens to march more across non-creep, which they're very bad at doing. That seems to be a very big difference maker as to whether you defend something or you start losing those very expensive, very glass cannon-y Void Rays. If it's a macro game, use the Void Rays to harass when possible while building up Charge, Archon, Storm. Again, in this build, we did see Zest prepare the transition into more of a gateway flood on the ground, but he could have used his Void Rays when they got to a count of like 4 to 6 to be out in the map a little bit more, especially if he's still scouting a Roach player or building Hydra count. And that's been really annoying for Zerg players to deal with. They've had to build Queens to defend and then try to safely get to Hydras, and then they decided, well, if we're building Queens anyway, I might just send them across the map, but that's a whole other thing. So if it is a macro game, if you don't see anything saying, okay, they're going to attack me, if you see a 4th hatchery with a full saturation, that's a macro game, right? That's when your Void Rays can try to use some of the dead space and particular maps like Romanicides, Natural. There's a lot of dead space that you can try to work with. To literally just like pick off a Queen here or there, pick off a couple of drones, pick off a couple of extractors, something that keeps you active on the map. But do be aware that they're glass cannons and that you should have the recall button in your mind ready to go if you perhaps missed a move out from the Zerg player with that. And that just about covers it. It is a fascinating development in StarCraft, so there's a lot of talk about the meta in this particular build, but as usual, when it comes to build orders in StarCraft, you're not necessarily going to be thinking about a lot of the offshoots, a lot of the branches, a lot of the strategy behind it, to be honest. You're going to be just trying to execute it to the best of your ability so that you have stuff to work with that will eventually be useful when you start getting into the strategy. So if you can follow along with even the amount of probes that Zest builds, you're going to be in a much better place than if you didn't. If you're stuck at 45, you can never seem to get up to 66 or something like that. That's where build orders really help. And, Void Rays can always be fun, right? And that's still an important factor when learning StarCraft, is to actually have fun. So if you're not interested in all the meta, that is totally fine. If you do have more questions, if you want to hear more specifics, if you want to hear rants on this topic, it's something you could search for all over the place on YouTube, but it's also something that you can ask me on Fridays with the newbie-friendly streams, where I try to answer questions, even if they are sometimes repetitive, to help you guys out. So check it out every Friday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/ZombieGrub. Please follow the channel down below, and thanks, guys, for watching, as always. I hope these build orders help you out, help you give a little bit of a structure to your game so you can improve and eventually start adding on some really cool strategic choices. Have fun playing StarCraft, and I'll see you guys next week.